Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Usually when we sit down at this table, we are looking at something pretty cutting edge. We're talking about the latest developments in AI, or maybe a sociological study that just dropped last week.
Right, or a new biography of a tech mogul hitting the bestseller lists. We definitely have a bias for the present.
We do. But today, we're doing something radically different. We are blowing the dust off something old. And when I say old, I don't mean, vintage 1980s. I mean ancient.
Yeah, it's a massive shift in perspective. We're really time traveling today for you.
Specifically, we're looking at a text that takes us back roughly 1,600 years. We've got a stack of papers here that feels heavy just holding it, metaphorically speaking.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a 19th century Oxford translation of a very specific text, the Homilies of S. John Chrysostom on the Gospel of St. John, which, that title alone is a mouthful.
It is, but every single word in that title carries a ton of weight.
So before we even crack the spine of this thing, let's set the stage for you listening. Who is this guy? St. John Chrysostom. It honestly sounds like a name you'd hear in a fantasy novel.
It really does. And his life was dramatic enough for one, honestly. He was the Archbishop of Constantinople.
Which is a massive deal.
Huge, one of the most powerful seats in the entire ancient world. But the name Chrysostom wasn't actually his family name. It was a nickname given to him after his death.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it comes from the Greek word Chrysostomos, which literally translates to golden-mouthed.
Golden-mouthed. That is a heck of a nickname. A
Yeah.
lot better than the bald or the terrible, which a lot of historical figures got stuck with.
Definitely. And it was earned. He was considered perhaps the greatest rhetorician, the greatest public speaker of the early Christian world.
And we're talking about the late 4th century here, right?
Yeah, roughly 390 to 398 AD. So this is a time before microphones, before mass media of any kind.
If you wanted to move a crowd,
You had to do it with your voice, your cadence, your intellect. If you wanted to change the culture, you had to project. And Chrysostom could hold thousands of people in the palm of his hand.
So what we have here in this source material isn't just some dry academic commentary.
Not at all.
It's a transcript of a master at work.
Exactly. These are homilies, speeches delivered to a live audience. And what struck me, and I think what's going to strike you as you listen to this deep dive, is that this doesn't feel like a polite Sunday school lesson.
No, it really doesn't.
It feels like a battle plan. It's a cultural critique. It feels like a high-level philosophy lecture, but with much, much higher stakes.
And the mission for our deep dive today is pretty specific. We aren't just summarizing the Gospel of John. We are looking at how Chrysostom uses the text.
He essentially deconstructs it to prove a point.
Right. He takes the author, St. John the Evangelist, who he repeatedly calls an unlettered fisherman, and he pits him against the absolute heavyweights of ancient philosophy.
The elite, Plato, Pythagoras, the intellectual giants of the classical world.
It's a heavyweight title fight. The fishermen versus the philosophers. And the way he builds that argument is incredibly sophisticated.
It's brilliant. He doesn't hide the fisherman's humble origins at all.
He highlights them, right?
Yes, he puts a massive spotlight on the poverty and the ignorance of the author.
Which seems so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
I mean, usually, if you want to prove someone is smart and worth listening to, you list their credentials, you talk about their degrees.
And Chrysostom does the exact opposite. He uses the lack of credentials as the primary evidence for the divinity of the message.
It's like rhetorical judo.
That is the perfect way to describe it. Rhetorical judo. He uses the opponent's momentum right against them.
I love that. So we've got that whole argument to look forward to.
Yeah.
But we also need to talk about the demands he places on the audience.
Yeah.
Because reading this, I felt a little intimidated.
He expects a lot.
He expects a ton from his listeners.
He does. He is not interested in passive consumption. He demands what he calls earnest will.
Earnest will. Okay, that brings us to the first section of our breakdown, the context of these homilies. Let's look at the preface of this translation.
Right, written by the Benedictine editor.
Yeah, and it mentions that these homilies are more controversial than Chrysostom's other works. Why is that? Was he just trying to start a fight?
Well, in a sense, yes. The editor notes that these homilies are heavily focused on fighting a very specific group of antagonists.
The Anomians.
The Enemians.
Okay, let's unpack that for a second because it sounds like an alien species from a sci-fi movie. Who were they?
They were a theological faction, a radical branch of Arianism. Now, without getting bogged down in the deep weeds of 4th century church politics, the core issue was the nature of Jesus.
The fundamental identity of who he was.
Exactly. The Anomaeans believed that the Son, Jesus, was not of the same substance as the Father.
So they saw him as lesser.
They believed the Son was a created being, distinct, inferior. The word anomoion actually comes from the Greek word anemoios, which means dissimilar.
Okay, so for them, Jesus is great, maybe the greatest created thing, but he isn't God in the exact same way the Father is God.
Precisely. And for Chrysostom, this was an absolute catastrophe.
A deal breaker.
It completely undermined the entire Christian faith in his eyes. So he is using the text of St. John as a weapon.
He's going line by line.
Line by line. Not just to inspire people, but to aggressively refute this specific heresy. He is arming his listeners with intellectual weapons.
That adds such a layer of intensity to the text. He's not just explaining a story. He's debating for the soul of his culture.
And speaking of those listeners, there is this really fascinating detail in the preface about when these talks were given.
Oh, right. It says they were delivered at an early hour of the day.
Yes. And this is a crucial detail for understanding the whole vibe of these sessions. Chrysostom actually contrasts the coolness of the morning, when they're all gathered there, with the midday heat mentioned later in the gospel story of the Samaritan woman.
So we were talking about early morning classes, like dawn patrol.
Which heavily implies a select audience.
Right, because who's getting up that early?
Exactly. Think about it. If you're getting up at the crack of dawn, before your workday even starts, to hear a dense, complex breakdown of the nature of the Trinity and the errors of the Anomaeans.
You aren't a casual listener.
No. You aren't there because your mom made you go.
You're there because you really want to be.
You were there to work. The editor suggests these listeners were less miscellaneous than his usual Sunday crowds. They were expected to be advanced.
They were the honors students of Antioch.
That's a great way to frame it. They were ready for much heavier theological lifting.
And that sets the tone for everything we're about to dive into. He isn't simplifying things for them. He's taken them straight into the deep end because he knows they can swim.
He respects their intelligence too much to dumb it down.
Now, before we get into the homilies themselves, there was one little textual curiosity in the preface that I think we have to mention for you guys.
The omitted story.
Yes. The woman taken in adultery. You know, the famous story where Jesus says, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone."
It is entirely missing from his commentary.
Completely gone. He skips right over it.
The Benedictine editor notes that in Chrysostom's homilies, he goes from the end of chapter 7 right into the middle of chapter 8. The editor speculates that the physical copy of the gospel Chrysostom was reading from simply didn't have that passage.
That is just wild to think about. A version of the text without one of its most famous, iconic stories.
It was a very fluid time for manuscripts. Modern textual criticism actually tells us that story likely wasn't in the earliest manuscripts of John anyway. It was added later.
But the editor also mentions another theory that was floating around back then, right? That perhaps it was omitted on purpose.
Yes, for fear of encouraging vice.
The idea being that if everyday people heard Jesus forgiving an adulteress so easily, they might take it as a license to just go sin.
Like, oh, Jesus is super chill about adultery, so I can do whatever I want.
Right.
Exactly. That was a genuine fear some early church leaders had about that specific text.
But the editor doesn't buy that theory when it comes to Chrysostom.
Not at all. He says Chrysostom was not the man to shrink from so slight a difficulty.
He wasn't the type to dodge a hard topic.
No, Chrysostom was incredibly bold. If the text was there on his scroll, he would have preached on it.
Yeah.
And he would have found a way to make it rigorous.
He would have leaned into it.
He would have said, yes, he forgave her, so now you go and be perfect. He wouldn't have let them off the hook. So it's overwhelmingly likely he just didn't have that text in front of him.
Okay, so that's the setting. We are in the early morning, cool air, elite audience, ready to do battle with the Anomaeans. Let's get into the show itself. Homily 1.
The spectacle.
Yes. The way he opens this is so vivid. He doesn't start with, okay, everyone, open your books to page 10.
No, he starts with sports. He starts with the entertainment industry of his day.
He starts with the heathen games. He knows his audience is hyper-familiar with the spectacles of the city, the wrestling matches, the chariot races, the star musicians.
Antioch was a major, bustling metropolis. It had all the distractions of a modern city.
And he paints this intense picture of the crowd. He says people run to see a distinguished athlete or a famous musician. They strain their eyes and their minds so that nothing escapes them.
It's the exact behavior of a superfan. He describes the whole theater of many 10,000s of people.
Just a sea of humanity.
A scene of intense, rapt attention. He says if a great musician comes to town, people leave their necessary and pressing business. They climb the stadium steps and they sit there silently, criticizing the agreement of the notes.
They become experts in the trivial. And honestly, I do this. I'll watch a 2-hour movie and sit there critiquing the cinematography and the pacing, but I can't remember what I read in a nonfiction book 5 minutes ago.
That is exactly the human tendency he is attacking right out of the gate. And then comes the pivot.
The rhetorical pivot.
He says, essentially, you do all that for a wrestler. You give all that mental energy to a sophist playing word games. How much more attention should you pay to a man speaking directly from heaven?
Wow. He is aggressively raising the stakes.
He's turning the church assembly into a cosmic theater.
That is a beautiful way to put it. A cosmic theater. He says John the Evangelist is not a musician or a debater. He's a man uttering a voice plainer than thunder.
Cleaner than thunder. That phrase is incredible.
It suggests something totally elemental, unavoidable. You can't ignore thunder.
And yet he immediately balances it. He says it is sweeter than all harmony of music, and he claims this voice has pervaded the whole earth, not by physical loudness, but by divine grace.
And the consequences of listening to it are huge. He tells them, if you listen to this voice, if you actually receive it correctly, you stop being a mere man. You dwell on earth as if it were heaven.
He is promising an ontological transformation.
But he also sets the stage visually, which I found fascinating. He dramatizes John's arrival on this metaphorical stage.
He contrasts John with the entertainers they were so used to seeing in Antioch.
He says John doesn't come out like an actor, which implies the actors of the day were doing some pretty specific flashy things.
Oh, they were. He mentions how they hide their heads with elaborate masks. They wore apparel of gold. They even wore these huge platform shoes to look taller and more imposing.
It was all fake, all smoke and mirrors.
It was all illusion.
And John? How does John appear?
Chrysostom says John appears shod with the preparation of the gospel. He wears a girdle woven of truth itself, no mask, no gold robes, just bare reality.
And the audience for this performance isn't just the people sitting in the room that morning.
No, Chrysostom dramatically expands the scope. He says the stage is heaven, the theater is the habitable world, and the audience includes all angels and men who desire to be angels.
So imagine sitting in that church. You aren't just listening to a morning sermon. You are sitting alongside angels, watching a fisherman explain the fundamental secrets of the universe.
It totally elevates the moment. It makes you feel like you absolutely have to pay attention. You can't be checking your sundial to see when lunch is.
Right, because angels are watching you watch them.
Which is exactly his goal. He needs them locked in. Because the argument he is about to make in Homily 2 is subtle, and it requires intense focus.
Let's move to Homily 2 then. This is where we get into the paradox of the messenger.
The unlikely hero argument. And Chrysostom leans into this hard.
He really does. He spends a significant amount of time just listing out how profoundly unimpressive John is by worldly standards.
He starts with the geography. John is a fisherman from Bethsaida in Galilee.
And we have to understand the cultural baggage there for the ancient listener.
Galilee was considered the sticks, the boondocks. It was deeply uncultured. Chrysostom even quotes the Pharisees and Nathanael from the text where they say, "Can any good thing come out of Nazareth?"
It was the backwater of the backwater.
Exactly. So he's starting with a severe geographic disadvantage.
And then he goes right into his class background.
Poverty. Extreme, grinding poverty. Chrysostom specifically points out the detail that John mended his nets.
Why does he focus so much on the mending?
Because he argues that mending nets is a sign of deep poverty. If you are a rich fishing magnate, you buy a new net when yours rips.
Oh, that makes sense.
If you are John, you sit there and patch the old one. Chrysostom says John was nailed to his fishing. He was completely tied to the physical grind of manual labor just to survive.
And then there's his education, or complete lack thereof.
He calls him ignorant and unlettered. He says John spent his entire life with fishmongers and cooks.
Fishmongers and cooks. That is a very specific blue-collar crowd.
He is painting a visceral picture of John's social circle. He's asking the elite audience in Antioch, how is a man who hangs out with guys gutting fish going to teach us about the metaphysical structure of reality?
How is he going to explain the concept of the word?
Right, it's a completely valid question.
If I went down to the local fish market today and asked the guy tossing salmon to explain quantum physics to me, I'd be pretty skeptical of whatever he said next.
Exactly. And Chrysostom's genius here is saying that skepticism you feel, that is actually the proof.
Wait, how does he spin that?
He asks his audience, how could a man whose friends were fish ever write the sentence? In the beginning was the Word. How could he suddenly discuss the soul, immortality, and the nature of God?
Topics that the greatest philosophers spent centuries failing to fully grasp.
Yes, so the logic follows. Because he absolutely couldn't have learned it in school.
Because he didn't go.
And he couldn't have absorbed it from his intellectual environment.
Because he was surrounded by fishermen.
It must be from God. It must be from the Holy Spirit. The rusticity of his background, as Chrysostom calls it, is the strongest possible proof of his divine inspiration.
That is wild. It completely flips the script.
If John were a trained philosopher, you could easily dismiss him. You could say, oh, he's just clever. He learned this rhetorical trick from a book. He constructed a neat syllogism.
But because he wasn't any of those things, the wisdom is undeniably supernatural.
It turns his greatest cultural weakness into his ultimate rhetorical strength.
And having established John's earthly weakness, Chrysostom then feels free to just absolutely dismantle the competition. Which brings us to the takedown of Greek philosophy.
Oh man, this section 4 of our outline, he does not hold back one bit.
He goes scorched earth. He calls the wisdom of the Gentiles ridiculous. He says these revered philosophers are like children playing games.
He goes after two big names specifically, Pythagoras and Plato.
The absolute giants. I mean, these are the pillars of Western thought.
And Chrysostom treats them like they are deeply embarrassing relatives. Let's start with Pythagoras. Now, I know most people listening probably know him from the theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared.
Right, the high school geometry trauma.
But Chrysostom paints a very, very different picture of him, a much weirder picture. He flat out accuses Pythagoras of sorcery.
Sorcery, like magic.
Yes, he mentions the ancient legend that Pythagoras conversed with oxen and eagles.
Wait, like Dr. Dolittle, talking to animals?
Talking to animals. And Chrysostom mocks this relentlessly. He says, okay, so he talked to a cow. Did that benefit the human race? Did he magically make the cow rational?
Obviously not.
No. Chrysostom says it was just a parlor trick to deceive the foolish and gullible.
And then there's the whole reincarnation stuff.
The transmigration of souls. Chrysostom finds this absolutely repulsive and also hilarious. He mocks the Pythagorean teaching that human souls can eventually become bushes or girls or fish.
Bushes. My soul could become a shrub.
According to the specific Pythagorean teaching, Chrysostom is citing, yes, a literal bush. And he is highlighting how degrading this worldview is compared to the Christian view of the eternal human person.
And then, of course, the beans. We have to talk about the beans.
We do. Pythagoras famously had a strict prohibition against eating beans. Now, there are a lot of historical theories today about why. Maybe he had favism, which is a genetic allergy.
Sure, a medical issue.
But to the ancients, it was mystical. Chrysostom quotes a saying attributed to Pythagoras, "You might as well eat the heads of those who begot you as beans."
That is just intense. Don't eat the beans. It's morally equivalent to eating your dad's head.
It depicts the revered philosopher not as a wise, enlightened sage, but as a deeply superstitious, eccentric dealing in what Chrysostom literally calls devilish trash.
Okay, so that's Pythagoras taken down a few notches. And then he moves on to Plato. And Plato is usually treated with a bit more respect in early Christian intellectual circles, right?
Generally, yes, but not here. Chrysostom goes right for the throat. He attacks Plato's Republic.
The famous text on the ideal society.
He heavily criticizes Plato's proposal of making women common to all, basically abolishing the traditional family structure and marriage for the guardian class in his utopia.
Chrysostom is not a fan of that.
He calls it completely absurd, and then he attacks Plato's underlying theology for being hopelessly inconsistent. He says sometimes Plato claims God is pure intellect, and other times he claims God is the soul of the universe.
So he can't make up his mind.
Chrysostom says their doctrines are ever-shifting.
He uses a really specific metaphor for that, right? The Euripus.
Yes, the Euripus. It's a strait of water in Greece, between Euboea and Boeotia, that was famous for its violent, constantly shifting currents. It would change direction multiple times a single day.
So the philosophers are just drifting in these chaotic waters?
Yeah.
They have no anchor.
Exactly. Contrast that turbulent water with the fisherman. The fisherman stands on a solid rock. He never shifts. He just says, "In the beginning was the Word," boom, unchanging.
There's also this fascinating critique he makes of style versus substance.
This is a classic, recurring Chrysostom theme. He is a master of rhetoric, so he knows how the game is played. He openly admits the Greeks had magnificent diction.
He sounded great.
They had incredibly flowery language. They knew exactly how to speak to impress a crowd, but he calls them whitened sepulchres.
Beautiful on the outside, but dead and rotting on the inside.
He even points out that Socrates, who was Plato's master, was famously ashamed of rhetorical tricks, yet these later philosophers use them constantly to hide the absolute emptiness of their actual ideas.
And what's the ultimate proof of victory for Chrysostom? The scoreboard.
The scoreboard of history. Chrysostom looks around his world in the late 4th century and asks his audience, where are the Pythagoreans? Where are the Platonists?
They're fading away.
They are fading fast. They are known only by name to a tiny handful of elite scholars.
But
John has taken possession of the world. Chrysostom lists the nations: Syrians, Egyptians, Indians, Persians, Ethiopians. They have all taken the time to translate John's doctrine into their own tongues.
that's such a powerful image. He's basically saying, look, the smartest guys in the room talk to nobody but themselves. But the unlettered fishermen spoke to the whole world.
He argues that the ignorant John has achieved true universality. His words are spoken daily in every language, while the wise Greeks are effectively silenced.
It is the ultimate vindication of the fishermen.
For Chrysostom, the culture war was already over. The fishermen had won decisively.
So John wins the credibility contest.
Yeah.
Now let's look at what John actually says. We're diving into section 5 of our outline, the theology of the word.
The very opening text. In the beginning was the Word.
Now, Chrysostom asks a question here that I think a lot of people might ask if they stop to think about it. Why start there?
Right.
Why not start with the Father? Like, in the beginning was God the Father.
It's a highly strategic choice. Chrysostom explains that John intentionally skips the first cause, meaning the Father, because the Father was already universally acknowledged as God.
Even by the opponents.
Exactly. Even the heretics, even the Jewish audience, even many of the pagans accepted some supreme father figure. That wasn't the active battleground.
The battleground was the identity of the Son.
The urgent, pressing task was to firmly establish the divine status of the Son, the Word.
Yeah.
He had to define exactly who this Jesus was for people who didn't know him or who were deeply confused by groups like the Anamoeans.
And every single word counts here.
Yeah.
Let's look at it in the beginning.
This brings us back to that anti-heretical nuance we talked about in the context section. By definitively saying, in the beginning, John establishes that the Son was not created at a specific point in time.
There was never a time when he was not.
He always was. If you rewind time back to the very absolute start, he is already there.
And the term word itself, logos in Greek, why use that specific term? Why not just say, in the beginning was the Son?
Chrysostom offers a very specific, brilliant theological reason for this. He says John uses the term word to prevent people from thinking the generation of the Son involved any suffering or change.
Okay, explain that. How does the word Son imply suffering?
Well, think about human generation. Being a human father, giving birth. It inherently involves change. It involves passion. It is a physical, temporal process.
A human father is fundamentally changed by the act of becoming a father.
Exactly. Chrysostom says the term word implies an impassible generation.
Impassible meaning without suffering or without physical change.
Yes. Think about it this way. When you speak a word, it proceeds directly from your mind. But does your mind diminish when you speak it?
No.
Does your mind have to physically break apart to create the word? No. The word comes forth, but the mind remains entirely whole and unchanged. It is a clean, immaterial generation.
That is a really helpful analogy. It takes all the messy physicality out of it.
And he also points out that we simply can't define God's essence with just one name. John uses word light, life. These describe divine attributes because the divine essence itself is totally incomprehensible to us. You need a constellation of names to even get a tiny glimpse.
Speaking of getting a glimpse, there is a section in Homily 2 where Chrysostom describes the mental workout of trying to understand this. I absolutely loved this part. It felt like he was describing a psychedelic experience or something.
It is a stunning passage of writing. He describes the finite human intellect trying to grasp the infinite phrase, in the beginning.
He uses the image of a man looking out at a boundless sea.
Yes. He says the mind looks for a starting point. You want to find the shore where the ocean finally begins, but you just can't. The was, in the beginning was. It always outstrips your imagination.
You try to throw your mind back 1,000,000 years, and the was is still there. 1,000,000,000 years, was is there.
Exactly. The mind gazes intently into the past, but it quickly becomes wearied. It literally gets dizzy. Chrysostom says the phrase expresses ever being and being infinitely.
It's meant to humble the intellect.
It is. You cannot wrap your brain around it. You can only stand at the edge of it in awe.
It's like he's guiding the listener to the edge of a massive cliff and saying, look down, feel that vertigo. That vertigo is God.
And remember, he is doing this for an elite audience that prides itself on philosophy. He's giving them the ultimate philosophical challenge. He's saying, stop counting beans with Pythagoras and try contemplating the infinite.
So we've had the grand spectacle, the paradox of the unlettered messenger, the philosophical takedown, and the deep theology. Now comes the part that feels the most personal to you, the listener.
The application.
Section 6 of our outline, instructions for the listener, or, as we called it, spiritual surgery.
This is where Chrysostom pivots from the ancient text directly to the people sitting in the room, and he gets very stern. The golden mouth becomes the iron hand.
He talks heavily about preparation. You can't just walk into this room cold.
He brings back the music metaphor. He says you can't learn a complex melody on a harp without intense attention. So how on earth can you expect to hear mystical sounds with a distracted, careless soul?
And this leads right into his massive warning about the table of devils. This is a very heavy phrase. What exactly is he talking about here?
He is talking about the fundamental incompatibility of the church and the heathen entertainments of the city. He strictly warns against attending the spectacles, the violent theaters, the horse races, and then casually coming to church afterward.
He's pretty graphic about what actually happens at those city spectacles.
He mentions effeminates cuffing one another, which likely refers to theatrical boxing or gladiatorial combat, and harlots speaking vile things on stage. He basically calls the whole entertainment industry a pageant of Satan.
And his argument isn't just about prudishness. It's about contamination.
Right. He says to his audience, you cannot listen to the choir of angels, meaning the Holy Church service, and then go fill your ears with filth. It's about the purity of the vessel. If you fill your mind with garbage, how can you possibly receive the gold of the gospel?
He uses this great extended metaphor of the ship to describe the listener's journey.
The listener is framed as a merchant, and this is a very active, rigorous metaphor. A successful merchant doesn't just sit around wishing for wealth. He fits out a ship. He hires a crew. He actively braves the dangerous ocean.
Chrysostom says we are sailing not from land to land, but from earth to heaven.
And the pilot of the ship is Christ, the crew working the rigging. Those are your obedient thoughts. But there are constant dangers out on the water.
The blasts of vainglory, the waves of desire for riches.
If you let those waves swamp your boat, you sink. Simple as that.
It's a call to incredible mental discipline. You are the captain of your own attention. You can't just drift lazily like the philosophers and the Euripides. You have to actively steer.
And then we get to the final metaphor for the church assembly itself, the spiritual surgery.
This might be one of my favorite concepts from the whole text. He doesn't call the church a school or a social hall or a community center. He calls it a surgery, a literal hospital for the soul.
Which inherently means we are all sick.
We are all wounded.
We come in from the outside world, from the market, the house, the stressful business dealings, and we come bearing deep wounds, stress, greed, anger, envy.
And the entire purpose of the homily is to heal those specific wounds.
But, and this is the absolute crucial instruction he gives them, you have to leave the cause of the wounds at the door. He says, do not bring domestic cares into the assembly. Leave the filth of the outer world outside.
That is so hard to do, though. I'm sitting in church or in a lecture or anywhere, really, and I'm just thinking about my grocery list or that stressful email I forgot to send yesterday.
And Chrysostom warns them, if you do that, if you sit there and don't truly listen, you don't just fail to heal, you actually gather fresh wounds.
Wait, it gets worse.
It gets worse. Because now you're actively ignoring the cure that's sitting right in front of you. He argues that knowing the truth and ignoring it is far worse than just not knowing it at all. You increase your own condemnation.
It's a really high-stakes environment he's creating.
He really doesn't let you off the hook for a second. He demands perfection, or at least perfect effort, from his listeners because he genuinely believes the message is that valuable. If the fisherman is speaking the literal words of God, you better listen like your life depends on it.
So let's wrap this up. We have journeyed all the way from the rejection of Greek philosophy by Pythagoras and your magic beans to the incredible elevation of the humble, unlettered fisherman. We've stretched our minds to the breaking point with, in the beginning was the Word. And we've been warned to treat this whole deep dive like a surgery for our souls.
That is quite the journey.
So what for us today? What do you take away from this?
I think it comes right back to that phrase Chrysostom uses early on, earnest will. He completely rejects the common wishing of the multitude.
Because everyone wants to go to heaven.
Everyone wants to be wise. Everyone wants to be good. But Chrysostom demands the active, grueling preparation of the merchant fitting out his ship. He demands real effort.
It's the difference between wanting to be fit and actually waking up and going to the gym every day.
Exactly. This ancient text is a spiritual gym.
And here's a final provocative thought to leave you with as you go about the rest of your day. Chrysostom makes a remarkably bold claim near the end. He says that if we truly understood and kept these words, we would no longer be mere men. We would live on earth as if it were heaven.
That is the ultimate promise.
So the suggestion he's making is that the only thing stopping us from becoming angelic right now, not when we die, but right this second, the only thing stopping us is our own attention span. It's our stubborn attachment to what he calls swinish things: wealth, cheap entertainment, endless distraction.
Precisely. We choose the mud.
So the real question for you, the listener, is this. Can you clear the deck of your ship? Can you leave your domestic cares at the door for just a little while? Are you ready to be a spiritual surgeon to your own soul?
That is the incredibly heavy question Chrysostom leaves ringing in our ears 1,600 years later.
Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.